Hey, folks, IU Insider Zach Osterman here. That's not the way I normally start this, is it? I usually say Zach Osterman, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. But I'm podcast rusty, Mike. It's been a while. A bit of a weird outage for us. Forgive me. I took some time off. We've kind of been scattered between basketball, but football season really hasn't stopped. We're going to talk about the combine here in a minute. We've apologized for not having talked to you good folks in a little while. Mike, how are you? Have you missed Mind Your Banners?
Yeah, I thought you just canceled the show or something.
I've been doing it with other people. I've been minding my banners elsewhere.
I wouldn't
teaching others to mind their banners. A bit of a minding outreach, if you will. We are going to kind of dig into a couple different topics today. We're not going to do a ton on the combine. Number one, it just started. Mike, you were up there today. Aiden Fisher was the first of 9 Hoosiers to speak, and then obviously there will be testing and different things. Not everyone's going to go through all the testing. You know, I think one of the basic things that Aiden Fisher pointed out when you and others talked to him today.
That was my question. I mean, this was my biggest takeaway because I had assumed the answer was the one I got. I was actually kind of surprised they're even doing drills, but because I think a couple things, and I think this is the main takeaway so far. Obviously, only one player went. I will be surprised if more than 1 or 2 do testing at the combine for the Indiana players. The turnaround time, essentially, because Aiden Fisher said most of the guys stayed on campus through the celebration, that extra week in Indiana, in Bloomington. So they didn't get out till training. And he said he gave it about 2 weeks before he started up, till like the start of February, essentially. Whereas other guys got almost probably more than a month of a head start trying to train for these testings. Indiana accommodated. I mean, it was probably a combination of things because they started spring late, but like they're accommodating the pro day, the guys that are going pro, by scheduling their pro day later to give them even more time to train. And with Fernando Fernando will bring every NFL team to the combine or to Indiana's pro day. So they will have all eyes on them. There is no reason to push themselves, risk injury, or do anything at the combine, knowing that you'll have a chance in front of all 32 teams to do what you need to do at Indiana's pro day. I think you will see a lot of guys saying, we're not going to do the testing because there is a big difference between having like 8 weeks and 3.5 when you are still so run down. Like Aiden Fisher admitted, he's like, it just took me a week to just get mentally right. Like, I mean, that was a grueling schedule. And he said, I think the feedback they're getting from what he said was that this isn't like like it used to be like players skip things. They'd be like, whoa, what's going on? Is there an injury? Are there concerns? But with the new playoff schedule, I think execs understand, like, look, you can't ask people to get done January 20-something, turn around 5 weeks, 4 weeks later, and do these testings at peak physical fitness. You just can't. And so I don't think there's any knock, because it used to be a different type of thing. And he said, look, everybody understands what the deal is now. And so I think that, Fernando's already said he's not going to do anything other than kind of meet with people and do the media tour and things like that. But it's sort of like all these things added up to the idea that Indiana's pro day will be very significant for a lot of people. And I do think that helps people that weren't invited, like, Mikhail Kamara, who's, didn't get, I think was a surprised guy that didn't get invited. They'll have all eyes on pro day. And I think that's sort of the big initial storyline, obviously, from the Indiana players' perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I think to clarify on this, the big reason behind this is the combine is not football stuff. Like, it is, but it's not. Like, you're not playing football, and especially when you're testing. Now, when you go through some drills and things, maybe that's a little bit more kind of like what these guys had been training their bodies for the last several months. But, like, when was the last time any one of these players, but at least before they got into maybe some of the combine prep, like maxed out on a bench press or ran a 40-yard dash? That's not what they have been training their bodies to do. And then, as you mentioned, you add in the wear and tear of a long season. Any season will wear you down. A 16-game season is going to do it even more. There's just this part of the draft process isn't, I mean, like I don't mean to say this flippantly, it's not really about football. It's about specifically these tests and to a certain extent the drill work as well. And so if you don't have time to almost just like reset your body, not completely, but pretty substantially, to go from this is how I'm training to play 65 snaps against Alabama in the Rose Bowl to now this is how I'm training to make sure that I rep 225 as many times as humanly possible in front of NFL scouts, like and NFL teams. That's two very different things. That's two very different sort of processes. And I think that's why I suspect you're right that a lot of these guys aren't going to. And then the other piece of this, which, is sort of in some ways, but is going to feel very unusual to Indiana, is, as you said, Indiana's got a small handful of players that are going to ensure that every team in the league is represented in Bloomington. Some are going to, they're going to be general managers in Bloomington. I think Pro Day is April 1st, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. There will be general managers in Bloomington. And like Fernando Mendoza is the main attraction. But you've also got, Omar Cooper now pushing his way maybe into a first-round conversation.
Like even if they're going for Mendoza, they're not closing their eyes for the rest of it and ignoring.
Right. Like there's only a handful of teams that are realistically going to think they've got a shot at drafting Fernando Mendoza. But like there are 2 or 3 other players in here that are going to be in the mix for like a maybe a first round, maybe an early day 2 pick, or at least a middle day 2 pick. There's going to be more opportunity than there's been at any Indiana Pro Day. And this is probably as much as anything the reason why Indiana's Pro Day, which is normally in mid-March, is going to be in April, is because you move the calendar back so that you can turn that into it, because Curt Cignetti knows just as well as anyone else that a lot of his players are going to be where Aiden Fisher is right now, which means
that's what I'm saying. I think they accommodated
you're giving them optimal opportunity at your pro day rather than at the combine, which is good for your program. The combine's good for your program. We can talk about that for a minute, but it's good to have 9 players there. It's a program record and so forth. But it's also good for your program to have that kind of showcase where the likely number 1 pick is throwing, where, typically at a pro day, it would be a surprise if most, if not all NFL teams aren't represented. But there's a difference between having like a regional scout.
I have covered, so like when I covered, because you haven't had a first rounder here since you've been on the beat.
I can't remember, to be honest with you.
But like Virginia Tech had Christian Darrisaw when I was there, and I did a behind the scenes look at his entire training process. And they had a couple guys. Caleb Farley was that same year. He ended up going in the first round as well. Auburn, the couple years I covered, 1 year Carl Lawson was at the top of the draft, but they had a couple other guys. It is, not just like it is significantly different, the interest level and the amount of people, the amount of bodies, the amount of focus that the attention gets when you've got high-end guys in that top end of the draft, first, second round. It is absolutely just a different world than what we've seen here in my 3 years, obviously two pro days. Not a huge sample size, but I'm sure it's going to be different than anything you've seen. Like you said, yes, they're limited with Fernando Mendoza, but get eyes on him. Like there will be a lot of people here. And to your point, like Omar Cooper's rising up. I think there's a lot of interest in a lot of these guys because they have so much film. Like I think testing is there's very few film question marks with a lot of these guys, but I think there is some testing question marks with some of them. And so I think there are going to be a lot of eyes on these guys as they kind of go through the process here, because that's maybe the last question mark they have, and to sort of see if they fit, because some people weigh the combine and that those testing numbers different than others. I think it's going to be an interesting process, and to see where all these guys shake out. A guy like Aiden Fisher, a good 40 time could be the difference between a 6th and a 3rd, or maybe that's too high, but 6th and a 4th, certainly. Like it does make a material.
Well, maybe to say it better, the difference between, drafted and stashed somewhere and drafted and on a contract, like right away. Like,
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
You don't always those late round picks don't always sign, right?
no, that's true. But I mean, he's even in a tweet. I mean, he's like late day 3 right now in a lot of mock drafts, and not that those aren't necessarily the end all be all, but like he can really improve. Like if he runs a slow 40 time, his stock ain't going up. But if he runs something that's surprisingly fast, you will start to see him climb. And those receiver guys, like that athleticism, if Omar Cooper wows, that will solidify him certainly in the first round if he were to run sort of a crazy 40 time after what he's done and kind of his film. So no, I think that
he told me, by the way, when we talked in January, that he was likely going to be a lot more active at IU's Pro Day than the combine.
Yeah, well. I assume because like you said, it's specialized training.
Same idea.
You don't want to risk an injury. You want to run a good time. It only hurt them if they run a slow time. Like delaying it for 4 weeks, there's not going to be no question marks when you play to the end of January. So we'll find out more. Obviously, I think tomorrow is the DBs. So D'Angelo Pons, Lewis Moore, and tight ends. Riley Nowakowski will be Thursday. A bunch of guys on Friday with Fernando, Roman Hemby, probably missing somebody, and Coogan on Saturday. But things will ramp up, and then obviously the testing portion and the drills portion starts tomorrow, I believe. So we'll be on site. At least some of us will, covering it, and we'll have more updates, and we'll probably talk more about it next week. Certainly.
I guess really quickly, just on the I don't know, the meaning of the combine. That's not a great way to put it, but we have talked in so many different ways about how sort of the reality has changed for Indiana. Number one, this is a record number of players. Number two, Indiana in all likelihood has its first number 1 overall pick ever. And it's worth saying too, like that player's a quarterback. So there's maybe even a little bit more kind of juice or energy around that. Like Fernando Mendoza's media availability is like Friday morning, is going to be as probably widely covered as any single player at this thing. And again, I know, as you mentioned, he's not, planning to throw at the combine. He's kind of been open about that, but it just kind of, it is just sort of another brick in the wall of the way that Indiana football just kind of has transformed its own profile within the sport in the last several years. Because, it's worth saying, I mean, I don't think Indiana is going to have the number 1 overall pick next year, and I don't think Indiana is going to have 9 combine invites next year, although maybe they will. But I don't think this is going to be.
We should write that down somewhere.
Yeah, that'll be one of our preseason over unders next year. But the point is, like it's not like this is a one-off thing. We can go back to this roster, and there's plenty of dudes that if they play as well in 2026 as they did in 2025, are going to have serious NFL aspirations and opportunities. This is another sort of resetting toward a new normal, I guess, for Indiana football, and an important one because, ultimately one of the things that even when we talked about Indiana having some success on the field in the past, one of the things they've struggled up against is, but Indiana doesn't develop enough professional prospects to really take back into recruiting, whether it's the portal, whether it's high school. Well, 9 guys in the combine, including the number 1 overall pick, that's hard to argue with.
Yeah, and I think it will be in Pons. I forgot to mention in terms of like a guy that could really help his stock. I mean, his measurements will be interesting too. Exactly. I mean, Indiana doesn't play as many games with like height and things like that, but if it wasn't for his height, he'd be a lock for a first rounder. Absolutely. But they've got high end guys like they could have. I mean, you're talking about probably a record number of draft picks. I think in like the modern era since it's gone to 7 rounds for Indiana. And 4 guys in the first 2 days, maybe, and depending on kind of how things shake out. I mean, those are big numbers. Those are numbers you haven't seen in Indiana. And like, look, yeah, it's not necessarily on the levels where when Michigan or Ohio State's been good, like what they've, like dozen guys in those, high end places, but like it's a step. And I think, I mean, even last year they got more attention. Like, don't forget CJ West, obviously Curtis Rourke went, but like, I mean, I think you're seeing a growing recognition of, Kirk Cignetti wants to create a pipeline, wants to show the development, and you're seeing the development, and the results of it is this growing number of players that are playing at a level that the NFL has recognized. Because I think, I mean, they had guys make rosters last year, even that didn't get drafted. And I think that shows that this staff had guys ready, like a Keyshawn Williams type guy or Miles Price, guys that stuck around that whole year. That those are things that make a difference for a program's perception, to your point.
Should we turn to basketball at this point? I mean, there's, it's we're saying like we're talking on Wednesday, so the combine stuff is only just getting going. There's going to be a lot more to come. Mike will be up there. I may be up there some. We'll just kind of see how the schedules go and basically what my children's school drop-off time allows me to get to, because some of this stuff is first thing in the morning. But I guess from the hopeful and optimistic to something swinging toward the other side of the spectrum, Indiana loses Tuesday night against Northwestern 72-68. I'm pulling up the net rankings kind of as we speak here.
Down to 40 for the first time, maybe also they were hovering above 40. Now they're at 40. As the lowest they've since we've got.
What I was looking for was quad 2. I think it becomes a quad 2 loss, because Northwestern creeps into the top 70. So it's not like, I don't think that this individual loss is as damaging as people think it is. I
think that's been overblown in terms of like what that does to their stake in the tournament, because
if you look at it
was like a bubble quad 2 team.
Look at Bart Torvik still got them at almost 73% to get an at-large spot in the tournament, 76% or so to make it overall. I think that extra 3+% is basically just recognizing they could win the Big Ten tournament. But like, number one, they're drifting a lot closer to the bubble. Like they are just a couple spots above sort of your first 4 out territory, or at least maybe last 4 in, which would mean Dayton. Number two, there is just what a loss like this suggests. It's another game where the offense just sort of goes dark in the second half. It happened in Wisconsin. They survived it barely. It didn't happen in the Oregon game, but it certainly happened last night. Like Lamar Wilkerson, I believe, made his first 5 shots and then didn't make another field goal the rest of the game. You stack it onto those 2 losses in the road swing. We said those games were kind of free hits for Indiana, but when you lose them by a combined 49 points and then you come home and lose to a 4-10 team, it just sort of.
You said they were free hits. I did not attest to that theory.
That's fine. I mean, that's fine. I mean, I said that ultimately it did not matter what happened in those games if Indiana took care of its business on the other side of them. Northwestern is Indiana not taking care of its business on the other side of them, and that's when suddenly all of it comes into sort of starker relief. And like you can. The way you can contextualize stuff always evolves over the course of a season. Indiana loses 4 in a row, and we say, boy, this season is slipping. Then they win 3 in a row, and we say, well, maybe they've found it again. They lose to USC, but then they win 2 at home, and now they've won 5 of 6. But now you can look at that USC game, which, by the way, USC is kind of in full retreat at the moment. I don't know if you've looked at them. They've lost 4 in a row. Now you can look at that USC game, and they've lost 4 of 7, and one of the 2 they won by the absolute skin of their teeth, the Wisconsin game in overtime. It just feels like this team is kind of – we've known what this team was most of the year, like what made this team tick, how this team won and how this team lost. It just feels like they have stopped evolving at a time when people have figured out ways to put them on the back foot, and not – Illinois or Purdue on the road. It's Northwestern at home. It's USC in a game that you can argue maybe Indiana should have won. Like it's moving in a bad direction, and Northwestern, while not damaging on its own, feels like the latest evidence of something growing, essentially.
I got a couple things. So we could talk about the groundhog nature of the thing, because that's all you kind of were talking about yesterday during the game in the second half. You're like, I've seen this for 30 years. But we can get to that. But in terms of this season, I think what it speaks to is like, look, they go 2-1 and beat Ohio State, which is another team sort of firmly on the bubble. They're probably fine, and they win 1 in the Big Ten tournament. Like, they probably get in, right? But now you have to ask yourself, with sort of the body language, with sort of the performances, is this team even capable of that?
Right.
Is the bottom falling out? Like what I thought like when they started hot, you kind of bought into it a little bit. You're like, man, this looks like a tournament team. And, even if they don't shoot as well, I mean, obviously the shooting never hit the level we thought it was team wide. Lamar sort of exceeded maybe expectations, but has been spotty sort of in the last 2 weeks. But it just feels like a team instead of it's not evolved. It's just sort of regret, like never found another level, never found momentum to kind of never hit a straight level up. And now it sort of looks like that. I was kind of writing in the first half. You watched the whole game. I came out, obviously for the second half and the last 10 minutes, it looked like nobody even wanted a shot. Like that possession that I thought was interesting that worked out. But Sam Alexis had like an easy layup and chose to just get rid of the ball, like didn't want it. It's like Lamar is the only guy that seems sort of interested in sort of stepping up. We thought maybe it'd be the opposite because they had all these guys that were alphas on their previous team that who would get it. But like it seemed like nobody really wanted a part of trying to mess up or take the game. Like they just had no sense of urgency. I thought the energy was lacking in the second half, and I found it sort of weird. DeVries didn't sort of agree with that. He thought they had good practices throughout the week, or the last couple of days coming out of Purdue, and that the first half showed that they were ready. But I still didn't that speak to like in that last 10 minutes, like you kind of just laid down a little bit. It's just it's weird because I don't know. It's a team that never found itself and seems to be regressing at a weird spot where. Yeah, maybe they thought they'd have a little more offensive firepower, but it just doesn't look like anybody's sort of ready to sort of take it on their shoulders, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's some of that. I just think what strikes me is the way that this team was supposed to win games was with offense. And I do think the defense has regressed. I think you can say in one breath that the defense has regressed while also acknowledging that for decent chunks of the season, it was better than maybe what we thought it would be when we saw this team in the summer. And like there were some glaring weaknesses defensively. But I think that the bigger concern, and it's certainly a recent concern, they had that long scoreless stretch at Purdue. You weren't really surprised with the way they struggled with Illinois just because the size alone was going to make that a matchup nightmare. But I think they missed at one point 11 straight field goals last night.
It was a 9-minute 56.
You go back to the Iowa game where they had a similar power outage, the Michigan State game, which was tied at like 53 or something, and they scored like 7 points in the last 10 minutes. It's been more than a month. Forgive me, I can't remember. But what I think is concerning, and this probably reflects a few different things. It probably reflects, to your point, this team not having players that feel comfortable or confident enough just sort of taking control of games, taking games by the scruff of their neck. Some of it is probably not getting, precisely what we thought Indiana was going to get out of some of these individual players. But I think what is striking more than anything else is just this was a team that was built to win by scoring. This was like that was when Indiana went into the offseason last year, hired a new coach, hired a new staff, and recognized we have to turn over this whole roster. And by the way, like there have been some people who started to, question whether that was a good decision. I point out there aren't exactly a lot of players that Indiana let go that are, sort of tearing it up somewhere else. And I'm not trying to turn this into, attacking any one individual. I'm not going to use names certainly about a team that doesn't exist anymore, talking about last year's team. But Indiana made one way or the other. Indiana was put in a situation where it recognized it was going to turn the entire roster over. It made some decisions, recognizing that Rome was not built in a day, and that it could not simply sort of say we're going to go into one off season, we're going to rebuild an entire roster, and we're going to get everything we need. One of the decisions that felt like was made from a very early point in the off season, stretching back to last spring, was we're going to build a team that can score its way to wins and can score its way out of trouble and can score its way into controlling games. And at times, to your point, Indiana has shown that. You go back to, again, games that maybe we overestimated in the moment, but you think about Marquette, you think about Kansas State, you think about Washington.
When was the last game that they had like that where it was more than one or two guys shooting well, or it was more of a team effort?
They had that against they had that against Oregon where 4 guys scored in double figures, but that's Oregon. Like that's the
that's sort of that.
Right. Like when was the last time they did? And you can go to like UCLA and okay, they get credit for it. Like what 3 players with 24 or more points? It's also an overtime game. 2 of those players.
Again, not the greatest competition,
right? Like Dorn and Bailey combined for 50 points against UCLA, but like they have not shown that consistency. I think there's a lot of blame to go around, but the point is, at the end of the day, this is just a team that when it has run into the trouble that I think it was built to score its way out of against good teams, it has just shown an inability to do that. And that's a problem when that is how you were constructed to win games.
So I've seen some comments on social media. What? So they haven't the 6 straight losses to Northwestern, haven't beat them at home since 2019 or 2020.
They have not beaten them at home since 2020. It was like the season that ended with COVID. And then they beat them on the road. And that's also the last time they beat them in regulation, too. They beat them on the road in overtime, I think, in the 21 season.
2-8 in the last 10 against them. And like some people are like making this like a bigger deal than it is. I mean, like I think the most surprising part wasn't that it wasn't surprising, right? And to what you keep talking about sort of off mic, to me, when we're sitting next to these games, you're like, I've seen this story. This is the story I've been writing for, your eternity on the beat, which, I think you started in 1974. But does this, is that sort of the overarching, and I think that's part of what you wrote about the insider in your insider last night in terms of like this job's a lot harder than it maybe needs to be or should be. But like the idea that this just keeps happening, that this is just this is Mike Woodson. This is Archie. Like this is what you've seen, right?
I think it's the idea that this is, in the moment. I understand why people blame the current coach, the current players, the current roster construction.
Yeah, I'm not absolving them of the
problems recur again and again, and we sit there sort of feeling like, well, here comes the same story, here come the same issues. Here comes the same frustration or apathy or malaise. Like malaise is the word that I think I've settled on the most. Then you start asking wider questions about like the institution has to be part of this. Like if it is something that ultimately affected Tom Crean's tenure, Archie Miller's tenure, Mike Woodson's tenure, and Darren DeVries' tenure, the institution has to be part of this. And there will be people who will push back and will say, well, IU football hired the right coach, and boom, overnight, they were one of the best programs in the country. But the first thing that coach did was completely remake the institution. That is, and those two things are joined up. Don't get me wrong. Those two things are directly linked. I understand that. But the first thing, and maybe the most powerful thing that coach did, was address the many failings of the institution and how to fix them and how to polish them, get rid of what wasn't needed anymore, either build upon or replace with what was. Like it just, yes, there is an extent to which you get the right coach. This all falls into place, especially in the modern era when you can turn rosters over quickly and the right amount of resources spent well. And I want to talk about Ryan Carr at some point before we're done here. Can make a real difference. But, I mentioned this in my story. It was striking to me last night. Not only the crowd, and the crowd wasn't the worst crowd I've ever seen in there for a Big Ten game, but it certainly was not impressive. But the fact that when Northwestern went up 4 with about like a minute and a half, minute 20 left, so not even like the last minute where Indiana, we don't have to talk about the foul call. I mean, I think we can all agree it was a foul. They missed it. There were a dozen other reasons why Indiana lost the game. There were a noticeable number of fans that just headed for the exits the minute Northwestern took a 2-possession lead. And I think the reason they did is because they have seen this story.
Well, I will, like, you started writing that they lost. Not to you were like, that's it.
Well, in fairness, I was doing that.
But you called it. You said, that's it. I've seen this story before. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I was writing just because you had to have something to file at the buzzer.
No,
but yeah, no, I mean,
it was more
you've only been on the beat 3 years, and you've seen this. How many times have you seen this story?
No, I know, but there's sort of you were like that. Martinelli, I think it was Martinelli who had the inside shot to put them up for, and you're like, that's it, they're done. Like you just had seen that before, and I know you're right. I'm teasing you a little bit, but
and they like, I mean,
it was
allowed to contextualize that Wisconsin game and say like you stole that. Like at the time, it sort of felt like, boy, Indiana really showed some grit and some toughness, and maybe this is the kind of win that swings their season around. Then they beat Oregon.
Lucked out against UCLA too, like essentially, like really lucky that they held on. That UCLA sort of,
Yeah, I mean, it. And then you get into this philosophical discussion, which lived. I mean, had built an entire subdivision in the IU football conversation for decades, which was like, how do you build a culture of expectation and a culture of success simultaneously? Because I mean, like I will give you this. I looked this up earlier today.
This is what you texted me. I got a spoiler.
So I my first year technically on the beat was 2008, 2009. So it's 17 years. 17 seasons, if I'm doing my math right. I guess this would be 18. This would be the 18th season. Because Tom Crean, that was Tom's first year. Tom got 9 years. Archie and Woodson each got 4. Now this is Darren DeVries' first year. So technically this would be the 18th season. If Indiana does not win its last 3 regular season games, this will be the 14th time in 18 years that Indiana has not finished above 500 in conference play. The only programs that are worse, that unless my math is wrong, and I did it quickly, the only programs that are worse are Northwestern in that span of time since 2008 are Northwestern with 3, Minnesota with 1, and Rutgers and Penn State each with 2. Maryland has 7, even though they only entered the conference in 2013. Nebraska, which entered the conference in 2011, will hit 4 this year. By comparison, if I did my counting right, Michigan has either 12 or 13, and Purdue either has 14 or 15. Like, that's the standard. Like, and by the way, like, Michigan's changed coaches twice then. It's not like, Purdue has at least been one coach, a long period of time, like an established sort of culture and foundations and whatever. Like, Michigan's changed coaches twice. Michigan's gone to the bottom a couple times. It took John Beilein like 4 years to really get that going. And they've still done that, 12 out of 18 years. Indiana's done it 4 times. And the difference here, and this is where the fan piece of it, when you went to Indiana football, there was, and I think we saw this last season, not 2025, 2024, there was always kind of this element of, but if you get it going, like, people will be so excited by it that it will almost just become like this sort of like this closed loop, like this virtuous circle. And we certainly have seen that with Curt Cignetti. And if you don't, then people won't be overly bothered, because that's not what they were in it for to begin with. And if you look at like a Penn State or a Northwestern or something like that, yes, if after a while the failure becomes so substantial that they just can't be ignored anymore, they'll call for change. But those fan bases aren't being essentially told that the expectation is you sell out the arena every night, you provide the most elite home atmosphere, you pay big money for your for your varsity club points, for your season ticket locations and all this stuff, because we're going to be the best program in the country and you'd better hold up your end. Indiana has, and this is, I'm not like picking on any one person, any one coach, AD, there are so many people that share this blame together. And I didn't mean for this to get overly philosophical, but it does feel like this is kind of another one of these moments when this program is arriving at this bigger question. Indiana, as an institution, has been selling basketball to fans for more than a generation now as an elite product, right, that it expected them to pay for and engage with at an elite level. And then it's delivered something substantially beneath that. And at a certain point, like, people like me can say justifiably, fans can be part of the problem. The atmosphere can become too toxic. That there's got to be some sort of self-policing at times. Yeah. But also, like, at what point do you lose the ability to ask people to buy in when the return on investment is just so consistently disappointing and frankly unacceptable? I don't know how to square that circle.
And to bring it back now, I mean, 'cause we want to talk a little bit about Ryan Carr, and I think this will kind of seg into that. Look, Darren DeVries gets more time. This isn't all on him. This is not a hit the panic button on his tenure by any means. I don't think that's what we are talking about.
No.
But I do think it's interesting. He had a lot of work to do to begin with going into next year with how many one-year guys they brought in, right? But now, and obviously now you bring in the GM, which he had talked about doing in the spring, kind of defining his responsibilities, what he wants. And Ryan Carr talked about having to balance the roster. And obviously it's going to be a slow process and take years. But going into next year, I think the hope was that you'd have some sort of building blocks, at least a couple to sort of take forward with you. Like, it doesn't feel like they established much in the way of that this year. And it does feel like, again, you're going into next year with almost, they'll have like at least three, two signees and one's expected to sign 2026 guys out of high school. Obviously there could be a late arrival of some sort. But I mean, you're talking about in large part another reset. Like, I mean, because what guys do you say and look at? And is that maybe the most concerning part? Like, because I think when you look at
I can tell you right now, if you look at percentage of minutes played, your top 5 players are all gone.
I mean, even if you found like a guy in like,
in fact, it's more than that. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's like your top. I think you're maybe 5 of your top 6 are all gone. Like, it's all the like these players. You knew that all they were here to do was not all they were here to do, but you knew that like the long-term impact they were going to have on this program, if they were going to have one, was going to be in proof of concept. And maybe to a certain extent that's happened.
I'm saying, like, you at least wanted to find 1 or 2 building blocks that you could take forward and not have to just hit all the recent, like go double-digit transfers again, or get close to that. Like, what guys can you confidently say is like a building block guy? And I think maybe that's the more like, because I think when you look at this season, like, make the tournament as a bubble team. Don't make the first 4 out, or like there's very little variation here on like what the expectation going in is. I think it's looked a little different, worse maybe than we thought it would, especially at the end, based on the way they started. It's not going to be very far off from what we expected at the start for his first year to look like. I think the concern is, I mean, yes, they had a heavily on one-year guys. You knew that to begin with, but you thought maybe there'd be 1 or 2 guys, building block guys. Sicily's fallen off the map. He's barely getting any minutes anymore. Like, it just doesn't feel like they have a lot now. It feels very much like, even going back to Woodson's final year, where you're just close to starting over, and it's a bad place to be. And Ryan Carr sort of admitted that. The first one of this thing was like, you can't do that because you get into overpaying players, and it's just a bad cycle. And you obviously got to get out of it. It takes time, but it doesn't feel like now. It feels like the cycle is going to restart itself, and maybe that's the long-term concern, because I don't think the outlook for this year looks all that much worse than what we thought it would be at the start, right? Like, but like, going forward, what do you sort of take? I mean, does that stand out to you at all, or am I on my own on this?
No, I mean, I've gone on record and said that I think there have been moments when, to go back to the term proof of concept, Indiana has kind of put it on film, and I think that Ryan Carr referenced when we talked to him on Tuesday night before the game. Some of these philosophical discussions that he had with Darren DeVries, he wouldn't kind of go into detail on them. Some of them had to be about basketball, like had to be about style, not just sort of like, oh, this is my philosophy of how to recruit players or whatever, or what I use analytics for. But like, some of it had to be style of play. And I think there have been moments when you have seen that from Indiana this season. I think that what has kind of gone into this year is probably a combination of some roster decisions that didn't pan out, again, like maybe an off season that forced some hard roster choices, a few different things. But it seemed like Ryan Carr, who, by the way, was, only like a rung or maybe 2 below the general manager level at the NBA level, coming down to college, that's not a small thing for someone like that, even given his ties to Indiana. There had to be some real philosophical belief in what DeVries is trying to do and in the picture he paints. And I think there have been moments when at least I feel like I've seen that on the floor in ways that I say, if Indiana can get the right sequence of players, then I think this will work at a level that will at least restore some baseline competitiveness to this program, and then you try to go up another level again. But like every coach has a shelf life. Every tenure has a shelf life. And if you don't get those players, if you don't make the right roster decisions, you can sit there and talk about all the stuff that conceptually you can see and you can do and you're going to teach and you're going to develop within your program. If you can't get the players that put it on the floor and eventually put, wins in the column for you, like every coaching tenure that goes that way ends the same. And I'm with you. I'm not, 28 games is no amount of time to evaluate one coach. This is not a referendum on, the wider idea of Darren DeVries' vision for Indiana basketball. And not every game, I say this every year, not every game can become a referendum on the direction of a program. That's not healthy. And that maybe is one of the reasons why when we evaluate why basketball seems like a much more difficult proposition at Indiana than it does in some other places, it is because we arrive at these seeming crisis points too often. It's just that there are also enough moments when it is fair to look around and turn the question to the other side of the table and say, okay, but what do you expect from people? And I think Ryan Carr's hire is very intriguing to me, not just because of the GM thing, because I think I've talked to you about this. Like, there are lots. GM feels like, in the broader sense of, especially in football and men's basketball, like one of those things where we've gotten excited about being able to hand out a new title in college basketball. But number one, I've gotten to know Ryan a little bit down the years. I've been kind of in the Pacers orbit, of course, not there a lot, but enough to just sort of talk to him a little bit about basketball. He's an IU alum. People within the Pacers organization respect him deeply. And again, you are bringing someone in whose entire job for an NBA organization for the last several years has been what he's going to be doing here, which is evaluating talent and mapping out a short, medium, and long-term sort of roster building strategy. He's not the general manager. I understand that, but he's really not that far off. Like, he's one of the people directly below the general manager that the general manager will be turning to, I'm saying in his role with the Pacers, and saying, what is our plan here? And not just who are we taking with our second round pick, but what are we doing in free agency? What are we doing in the draft? And how does that fit into the wider plan we have for the next 1, 3, 5, and 7 years of this roster, of this franchise? It's a serious hire, even if it is, I know there are some people, especially post Mike Woodson, fair or not, that look at anybody with IU ties and they say, this is just a nostalgia play. To my mind, it's a serious hire. There's a lot of work to do, though, as you said, and not just because so much of this roster is going to turn over, but because it does feel like too often this program has just kind of been just constantly resetting itself, looking for different ideas while operating under all of the same conditions, paying fealty to all of the old sacred institutions. I don't want to get overly philosophical, but I can even take you back. There were 2 years in a row in Tom Crean's tenure where he returned fewer players than he signed. And that was long pre-portal. And this isn't me saying, oh, this is Tom Crean's fault. It started there. It's that this program has,
it's a cycle. It's a cycle that feeds into.
This program has a culture of failing to deliver the consistency necessary to win at the level that it says it expects for a lot longer than just the last 2 years, or even just the sort of portal NIL era. And I think that Indiana's hiring Ryan Carr, to me, is a sign that Indiana is willing to acknowledge that some of these problems run deeper than just they got it wrong last spring or a coaching change is hard to navigate, and there need to be some really fresh ideas brought in here.
Yeah, and I mean, he like you said, he didn't sort of dive deep, but I mean, he clearly, I think he agreed with your point. He's like, look, not many people would make this jump, and it wasn't. And he specifically said this wasn't because I'm an Indiana guy. Like, I would have been content to be a fan. Like, he's like, they had to sell me on the job itself. Like, why would I want this role? And I think he sees a space where he can thrive now. Sort of like, I thought it was funny when I asked him specifically, is like the college game becoming the pro model. He's like, well, there's a lot less rules in college actually, and he wasn't just talking about like he was talking about specific, like, because like every dollar basically is what he said is like accounted for in the NBA. You have mid-level exemptions, you have all these things that like
he wasn't saying it like it was a good thing.
yeah,
like
it wasn't like breaking rules or something. It was like literally financial templates in place for like every dollar you spend is accounted for. Whereas in college, it's all secret. You don't know. Everybody's budget's different. You can't. It's hard to evaluate players, and so like he talked about maybe in the future bringing in an analytics guy so they can sort of try to create, which I thought was very interesting, create these models themselves to sort of try to get a better handle on it. So like you said, like they're making moves and they're not standing still. And I think this will ultimately benefit them long term. But I do think it's hard in basketball from what we've seen. Very few programs can sustain the ability to sort of turn over their roster every year like this, have very few building blocks, and see the kind of sustained success. Because in basketball, if you miss on two guys, you're more than like two guys you were going to count on. It's hard to make up. Whereas in football, obviously outside the quarterback, there's a lot more wiggle room on a 85 guy roster when you're counting on 30 to 40 guys. Outside the quarterback, nobody has that outsized influence. But like basketball is just really hard. Like I don't know. Like it's just
and it's harder, I think, to keep fans engaged when it turns over this much. In football, you can turn over 30 scholarship spots in football, and there's still 55 guys coming back from the year before. If you turn over, 35, 40% of your basketball roster, again, presuming a decent amount of that turnover is your top line players who either graduate or move on to professional careers because they're good enough before they finish their college eligibility, then you're making it harder, to give people something to latch onto. And listen, this is, and I want to wrap it up here, but it's difficult because you don't want, like, and this is, you joke about how long I've been on the beat, but I have had this conversation a lot, and it is very hard to figure out where the lane is, because you can't turn every result into a referendum, for better or worse, on the direction of a program. That's not healthy. That's how you wind up spending the money Indiana spends in basketball, expecting what Indiana spends from basketball, and then delivering the results that Indiana does in basketball. And people can like that or not. They can choose to hear it or not, but it is reality. But on the other hand, after so long, you also have to acknowledge that, some of the sins of what got this program here are handed down. And each subsequent coach gets a little bit less benefit of the doubt, a little bit more skepticism, and probably a little bit more apathy, frankly, than the one before, until somebody gets it going. And, football showed us, I think, that if next year Indiana comes out and wins 27 games, then that arena will be full. People will be excited. The energy will be back. But it will be back because Indiana righted something about itself in the present, not because Indiana reached back for something in its past. And I think that line to walk is harder and harder for programs like this one. You think about Nebraska football. For a long time, I resisted that comparison. I said Indiana was more like Texas, where it probably wasn't quite as good of a job as it thought it was, but there were still all of these built-in cultural advantages. I think some of those have regressed because of the portal, because of NIL, and because, frankly, Indiana's just gone so long without consistent success that, you do start to feel a little bit more like a program that spends so much time talking about the past because it doesn't have a good grip on its present. And like I said, it's just, it is a hard conversation to navigate, because you can't turn everything into a statement on a grand statement on the big questions of the day. But at some point, those also become unavoidable.
So what's your prediction for the last 3 games?
I mean, I actually thought they'd win the last 4.
Fail.
The The thing that gives me pause, because I've seen Indiana win the game it's going to play Sunday many, many times. The thing that gives me pause more is the crowd, because what has won this game, and I'm talking about Michigan State on Sunday, home, I think it's CBS, so it's like a 1 o'clock start.
No, 3:45, I thought.
Is it 3:45? So it's the afternoon CBS game, forgive me, or the late afternoon game. What has won games like this for Indiana as much as anything else, and I think you probably experienced this with the Purdue game this year most recently, is the crowd. And not that the players don't win it too, but that when Indiana can weaponize Assembly Hall, it
Kansas. The reason they almost beat Kansas my first year here was because of the crowd.
Yeah, the reason that like last year the only, like, for what felt like a month, the only really positive result they had was that 15-point win at home against Purdue. Like, that was a win that felt like it kind of arrested. They'd lost they'd lost 5 of 6 and I think 7 of 9, and then they beat Purdue by 15 at home, and they wound up winning 4 of their last 5. If you remember what that game was like it was because they activated Assembly Hall and they got the crowd on top of Purdue, and Purdue ultimately just couldn't manage it. That is what wins games like this for Indiana as surely as anything else. And what gives me pause is the way that crowd, first of all, showed up and then responded Tuesday night. And I'm not criticizing those fans, and I have been critical of fans in the past. People who listen to this podcast a long time know I have been critical of fans in Indiana fans in the past and their attitudes and their approach to this. I'm not criticizing them for their relative lack of interest in this program right now. If they get a crowd like that from Michigan State, I think it's very hard. I still see a path to them winning these 3. I think at this point, 2-1 is a lot more realistic and even hopeful to a certain extent. But Sunday feels, frankly, like high noon for this team this season, because if they lose Sunday, then it really does.
That's the hard thing, right? Like, I think I think they could beat Minnesota, and I don't think much of Ohio State. I know it's on the road. That's been a weird place to play for them the last couple of years. But to your point, like, if they lose again on Sunday, that's 4 straight, and the vibes are not going to get any better, right? And yeah, I mean, they're kind of still in the tournament, and even if they lost to Michigan State, I still think they'd probably be a bubble team. But you run to the point, how do you have any faith of predicting them turning the skids around in 2? Because that's Tuesday or Wednesday, 3 days in between the Minnesota game and Michigan State.
Wednesday.
Yeah. So I was sort of leaning in 2-1, but 2-1. But if for that to happen, I think maybe they have to beat Michigan State, and they lose to Ohio State. And I don't know how that shakes out for their bubble chances. But if they don't win Sunday, you really sort of have to start questioning, are they even capable then pulling out of this sort of, losing? Because it's been the opposite in recent seasons. The last 2 years, did they end it on 4-game win streaks going to the tournament? Or
they won 4 of 5 last year, and then 2 years ago they won their last 4 plus 1 in the tournament. 2 years ago, in fairness, they were nowhere near it. Last year, it felt like they played their way back onto the bubble, and then it turned out.
So this year, they're sort of going the opposite direction, and yet, I don't know that it ends their chances on Saturday if they lose. Sunday. But it just feels like not a team that can come back from it, just because that's 4 in a row. And like you said, they lost 2 of the games badly. It'd be hard to see them do it. So, I mean, I say 2-1, but I think it has to include a Michigan State win, basically, because I don't know that they can lose 4 in a row and then sort of bounce back at this point.
He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. We'll be back next week. I promise we won't take so long between shows. But for now, for the Herald Times, for the Indianapolis Star, this has been Mind Your Banners for February 25th, 2026. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.